Welcome to The Ambitious Introvert, the leading growth and development podcast for the estimated 56% of us who recharge by going inwards. Our purpose is to help you manage your social battery and own your energy so you can reach your true potential in your business, your career, or your life. I'm your host, Emma-Louise, a former air traffic controller, entrepreneur, and a success coach with over 15 years experience. I've supported hundreds of introverts like you who dream big and are ready to take action towards making those dreams a reality without compromising their energy in the process. Each week, my guests and I will be sharing tips, tricks, and hacks on how to build your resilience, master your mindset, and cultivate self-leadership. Skills that will help you reach your goals without trying to be someone that you're not. We'll also be sharing valuable lessons and insights from our own personal experiences, all focused on one thing: helping you own your energy to reach your potential. Hello, welcome back to the Ambitious Introvert Podcast, and I'm truly blessed in this start to 2024 season of the show because for the second week in a row, I get to interview someone that is a good friend of mine and someone that I get to spend time with in real life. So just like I chatted with Kristen last week, this week I am chatting with the lovely Marjan Mahoutchian. And it just makes the whole process of recording the episode even better. I love speaking to all of my guests, like so much. But when it's someone that you already have that rapport with and know so well, I just feel like it brings an extra level of depth to the conversation. So Marjan is an independent global leadership coach, team advisor, and business transformation specialist. She's an ICF accredited coach. And most importantly for this episode, she's a certified Gallup strengths coach. Now, you may have heard this also referred to as CliftonStrengths, and it's one of the personality tests, I'm going to say, that has never really appealed to me until last year. And I think the reason being that it felt quite corporate, and I don't know why, but it just did. So obviously I've got so much time for Enneagram, Myers-Briggs, human design, all of these things. And I'd never delved into CliftonStrengths until I became close with Marjan, and she told me all about it, and I started to see it from a different light. And I was lucky enough to work with her last year on my own strengths, and the whole thing blew me away so much, not only because of how accurate they were, but also because of the potential that I could see in, if we know our strengths and likewise know our weaknesses, how we can tailor that. And so it is very corporate because it's so relevant for team dynamics. It's so relevant for those of you who are looking to get promoted and move into different roles to understand really where your strengths lay. And for those of you that are founders and entrepreneurs, exactly the same thing. It will make scaling your business and outsourcing and task management so much easier. And the other thing I will say that really surprised me about the strengths, and you'll hear us talk about this, is how important they are for us to actually thrive. So it's not just like, oh, do this because you're good at it. It's do this because if you don't do this, you will feel stagnant, you will stall. It's so important for our overall well-being for us to be exercising our strengths and leaning into the things that we are so innately good at. So I will just say a very small disclaimer here. While you will hear Marjan talking about Gallup, she is a Gallup certified coach and they are the owners of the CliftonStrengths brand. This interview is purely her. She is not here representing Gallup in any way, shape or form. And although much of what she says does align with what they say, any opinions that you hear her express about the strengths or about anything else are fully her own. So please settle in and enjoy learning about the CliftonStrengths and see if you're as surprised about some of the things they do as I was when I had my session with Marjan. Oh, I love when I get to interview people that I love on the podcast. So Marjan, welcome to the Ambitious Introvert.
Yay! Yay! Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be having this conversation with you, Emma-Louise.
So obviously we're going to talk about your zone of genius, but let's just address the elephant in the room. Not an introvert.
No. Well, so this is the funny thing. When people who know me, when I tell them actually I'm a bit of both, I'm introverted and extroverted. So I'm pretty much half and half. They can't see that. They can't see the introversion in me, but there is a part of me that is actually quite introverted. So not outright introverted, but there is an element of me that is.
I remember earlier this year, you were away with your business and we were voice noting and you were like, I'm on my own all day and it feels really like luxurious. And at first you were like, I feel a little bit lost almost, like a bit, I've got nothing planned. And then through the day you were sharing with me. And by the end of the day, you were like, oh my God, this has been the best day ever. I need to spend more time on my own.
Yeah, I remember that message too. What's interesting is because I'm so busy all of the time and I'm always in other people's energy, it's very rare for me to get those moments where I am by myself. So when I am, and when I was that day, it was a bit, of a moment where I had to think, oh gosh, what am I going to do now? My natural instinct was to get on the phone to people, but then I decided not to do that and just to enjoy the day for what it was. And I absolutely loved it. Having said that, I don't think I could do several days on the trot just being by myself. So that was a nice moment to spend by myself, but not one that I would probably do on a regular, on consecutive days.
A very good friend of mine is also hugely extroverted, but she also sees the benefit of this time alone. And it's not from, obviously, us introverts recharge by being alone. You guys recharge by stimulus and being around other people. But for her, it was more about getting to know herself and a self-awareness piece. Because like you say, if you're always on the go, you're always with other people, your natural instinct is pick up the phone, like, let's be busy, let's connect with people. She was finding like it hard to say, like, what do I actually want? And what do I actually think? So she finds that kind of time alone, carving out for that self-awareness piece crucial. And then she's like, get me around all the people.
Well, one of my strengths, and I know we're going to come on to talk about this, is achiever. And my achiever strength likes to be busy. It likes to feel like it's achieving something. And so that's why I'm probably always looking at something, whereas actually just doing nothing sometimes is actually achieving something. So that's definitely one of the key lessons I've had to learn the hard way, but also, consider more about how I do that on a regular.
Love it. Right, let's dive in. So anyone listening to this podcast for the last 3.5 years knows that I love a personality test. Talked about them all. We've had people on about human design, gene keys. We've had the Enneagram. We've had Myers-Briggs. We've gone down it. And I have not embraced CliftonStrengths until meeting you this year because, to be honest, it felt very corporate. I know it's a weird thing to say, but there was something about it that I didn't see how it applied to me as an individual. As an introvert, I'm very inwards looking. So things like Myers-Briggs, it's talking about me as a person. My human design is about when and where I was born. With CliftonStrengths, I could really see it as more of like a big organization or a team dynamic. And then it wasn't until knowing you, and you very kindly did my reading, that I was like, oh, I totally see how I can use this like in my development. So give us a little bit of a backstory as how you came to be so passionate about CliftonStrengths.
So I love that you call it a reading, because it's
what would you call it? What actually is it?
Oh, it doesn't matter. Well, I call it a debrief, but a reading makes it sound like it's a coffee in a cup kind of conversation.
Marjan, tell me what my strengths are.
But didn't it feel like that? And we'll come on to talk about how how you felt when you first got your results. But the reason I love CliftonStrengths, and actually I'm a certified Gallup strengths coach, and the thing that drew me to it is that with the strengths, it's not just an assessment for the sake of taking an assessment and reading the results, being inspired by it, and then putting it in a drawer and forgetting about it. For me, it's about that, well, what next? What now? And so the journey that you get from having the CliftonStrengths results is one of real self-discovery at a much deeper level. So it's not necessarily about telling you what you're doing wrong, or it's not telling you that you fit into this box. It's not giving you a label, because as individuals, as people, we've got far too many labels. And that's one of the key principles of the Gallup CliftonStrengths, is that they don't, they're not there to give labels. And what I love about it so much is that it is so unique to you as an individual. And it really helps the individual understand more about how they naturally think, feel, and behave. And then, as I said, it's, okay, well, what do I do with that information now? So now that I have this, how can I use this to create the kind of life that I want? How do I use this information so that I can respond better? I can, build better relationships. How can I strategize around this? And that's what I loved about it so much, and still love about it so much.
And I have used it significantly this year in changing the business and pivoting and restructuring that, which we can get onto. But when I did my test and then had my debrief stroke reading with you, something that stood out to me. So obviously it's 34 strengths, and the top 5 are the ones that we really want to focus on, because that's where our biggest strengths are. And then when I looked, what I will say first of all is the language of it. At first, I wasn't sure until, you sent me the report, and I was like, I don't know about this. But as soon as you explained what they mean, I was like, oh yeah, this is gold. But looking at the bottom 5 for me was super interesting, because I'm very optimistic. I'm very future focused. I don't tend to wallow in the past. I think we can learn from it, but I don't I don't give it a ton of energy. And I think context was my lowest or second lowest, which is all about that. And when you were saying like a lot of people with high context can be hoarders, and I'm like the most minimal person ever. I'm like, get rid of everything in box 0. And it was so funny to see, because of course, someone that had context really high, if I'm working with that person, that could not cause problems, but we're going to have a different mental model based on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting how the language, as you say, in the results, you might think the meaning of those words that are used within the CliftonStrengths assessment is what we know those words to mean, from a direct dictionary. But actually, the way it describes it and the way it describes your strengths actually helps you understand what it means from another perspective, and the perspective of, well, how is this particular strength influencing the way that I think, feel, and behave? And you're right. I mean, the bottom 5, it's really interesting to know what your bottom 5 is, more so because you don't want to focus on improving what's at the bottom. And the whole ethos around, the CliftonStrengths is really about, well, focus on what's right with people rather than what's wrong with them. But it gives you an awareness of, is it something I need to have? Is it something, particularly for people in roles that might require a certain thinking, or it might require a certain way of being or a certain skill set? Is there anything at the bottom that they really need to be aware of in order to use that within their day-to-day work or their day-to-day life? And if it's a no, then great. Like, you don't need to worry about developing those. But what you want to do is understand how you create strategies around what might be perceived as your weakness, or what might be a weakness. Is what strategies do you need to create around those weaknesses so that you can continue to thrive?
It's funny, one of the things in my business for a long time is I have a client welcome series for one-on-one clients, which is an audio series, and it's how to get the best out of our time together, some resources, recommended practices. And one of the things I say in there is, if you are doing big things in the world and you're, growing a business or you're climbing in your career, as a woman especially, and as an introvert, you're going to come up against things, and it's likely you may want to talk to a therapist. And I'm not interested in diving into the past. Obviously, that's why I'm a coach. I'm maximizer, future focus. But there is also a place for that. So that's a strategy that unknowingly I had put in place, that I'm like, if the stuff in your past that's holding you back that you need to process and you need support with, like talk to a therapist, because therapy and coaching they complement each other so well. And that's obviously why.
Yeah, absolutely. And they are two very different approaches. But as you say, they do help complement, because coaching is more forward looking. It's more about, finding the solutions to current, I guess, situations, opportunities or challenges, and looking ahead at the future, whereas therapy mostly focuses on the past. And so, yeah, I mean, they complement each other in a really, really great way.
But not something that I want to be doing, because my context is low. So when I took the assessment, and I remember you sent me the results and you were like, I'm not surprised by any of this, because you knew me pretty well by then. And like I say, I looked at words and I was like, all right, I'm not convinced here. So my top strength is strategic. And this is where the language part comes in, right? Because to me, strategic is like implementing or kind of minutiae, like procedures and ticking off tasks and that kind of thing, which I hate. And I was like, oh, I hope that's not what I should be doing. And then when you sent everything through to read ahead of the debrief, strategic is like big picture thinking. And I'm like, oh, that's exactly what I do. That's what I did as an air traffic controller. It's looking at this big picture and all of the different moving parts. And I was like, oh, that's why I love to do that with clients, because we look at their life, business, career, or whatever so holistically, that made so much sense. So where do you see this when people look at a word and they go, I don't resonate with that? Do you see it often that they then see the description and kind of the true meaning of it and they go, oh, yeah, that makes sense?
Yeah, it happens quite often, actually. There are sometimes, I say a lot. I guess it's a mixture of people who resonate directly with what the report says, but also individuals who don't resonate with it immediately. And it's only through the conversation that they get to understand how it's actually showing up for them. Because the way that your strategic shows up won't necessarily be the same way someone else's strategic at number one would show up. It would look quite different. And so, and that's what's so great. It's so individualized, but to really understand how it shows up for you, the devil's in the detail. It's in the conversation. And so when, I speak to clients about their experiences and helping them connect with how strategic might show up for them, that's when the penny really drops for them and they really understand, actually, right, I get it now. I see how this is my number one, because that's absolutely what I do. And so that big picture thinking, as you say, is one of the, key, I guess, aspects and, traits of someone who is strategic. They do that big picture thinking.
And something you said in the debrief, I'm going to call it the right name now, in the debrief.
Call it a reading. I love the fact that you're calling it a reading.
Everything's a reading to me.
Call it a reading. I love it.
In our session, when you read me and debriefed me, like that point you make about like someone's strategic is going to look different to someone else's, and especially based on what their other strengths are. So I remember you saying to me, like, my 3 and 4 are intellection and ideation, and that can look very different based on what the other strengths are in the top 5, or even like which order they're in and how they complement each other.
Yeah, absolutely. Everyone's individual and they're very different because of their life experiences, right? So their conditioning through the childhood, their life experiences, all of these events in life will feed towards who you are as a person, right? And so, yes, it's going to be different the way it shows up. This is just a way for you to have a common language with other people who have CliftonStrengths. So the words, the themes, they're called themes. These themes are just a common language that people get to use when they're talking about their strengths for people who, are speaking to others who have done the assessment. So that common language is great to have, but what it then leads to is, well, how does it show up for you? How is it very unique to you? How do you respond using this particular theme? How do you react when you've got this particular theme? There's something also called blind spots, which is exactly that is, how might we be overutilizing or underutilizing our strengths? And that is such an enriching conversation when I speak to clients about, their blind spots and how it might be showing up.
So interesting, because I think that's why I thought it was quite corporate, because the way you've just explained that, you can totally see why it's helpful in a big organization if you're working in a team to understand others' strengths. If you are maybe going for a promotion and people can look and say, how your strengths fit in with the role and with the team. But something that you said to me that was really eye-opening in my reading was that if I don't do enough of my strengths, I'm not going to thrive, that it's such a big part of me. And it's something that I would say the strategic strength is very much what I used in air traffic control. And, I do miss using my brain in that way. I will often say that. I'm like, I do really miss controlling airplanes. I don't miss working shifts and things like that. But using my brain in that way, I've never found anything else quite like it. And it's obviously why I could do the job, why I was selected for it, and I was able to, pass the tests and qualify and stuff. It makes so much sense now. And that's something that I have taken from learning about this, is like, I have to create opportunities within my business to have this space to think big and think strategically, because otherwise I'm stifling myself.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are most successful when we utilize our strengths on a regular basis. They're actually not strength until you work on them. So they start being talent. They start by being a talent.
Ooh.
It's only when you work on a talent, you nurture it, that it becomes a strength. Otherwise, it's just idle. If it's not being used, it's just idle and it's not doing very much for you. So you're not owning that strength. Now, with each of our strengths, we bring a value. We bring value with our strengths. And there are certain needs that we have with them. And those needs are the activities that we need to be doing in order to keep those strengths alive. And so what you described there is there was a certain activity that was taking place that was sparking you. It was energizing you in a way that enabled you to use your strengths. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to stay being an air traffic controller for your whole life because you're getting that energy from that particular activity, or that particular strength that you have is thriving because you're in that environment. You can create that sort of environment anywhere else. You can create the response through other activities, but just by understanding and knowing that that's your strength and that's what you need, you can start creating that kind of lifestyle for yourself. And when you create now, whether it's in your personal life or whether it's in your professional life, you have an element of control over creating that type of environment. So it's always good to reflect on, your environment, how you're living your life and what you're getting from your work, how you're utilizing your own talents and strengths. And where you do need to make changes, then you've got the power to do that.
Love that. And it's very permission given, like things like human design and Myers-Briggs, where I think where we get opportunities sometimes, there's a lot of should and this is too good to miss and obligation. But actually, if we can take a step back and look, it would be very easy for me now. And, I'm no expert at this at all. I've just, dived into the information you've given me. But I can see very clearly now, is something going to be utilizing my strengths? Is it going to be aligned with it? Something else that came up from it that I didn't realize was a thing, and I think could be really helpful to anyone listening that is an entrepreneur. You were talking about how these talents and strengths are in different categories. And one of the categories is things like relationship building, but one of them in particular was execution, as in implementation. And so low on my strength, like the first one that was execution, I think it was down at 20 or something. You're like, you need people in your business to execute, to do the day-to-day minutiae. And this has been a source of shame for me for years, because a lot of these tasks are easy. It's like scheduling a newsletter or uploading a blog post. It drains my energy so much. And I'm like, why am I drained? I can run a business. I can control airplanes. I can do all these other things. Why can't I schedule a blog post? This makes no sense. This is easy. It should be easy for me. And it's not. I do it and I feel exhausted. And when you said that, I was like, oh, that's why.
Yeah. Do you know, look, we've all got some sort of administration or an activity, a task in our lives that we have to do that we don't particularly enjoy doing. But then there comes a time where that task or activity is essential to your success. And it's in those moments that it's really important to understand for yourself why you don't enjoy them. What is it specifically about them? So for something so easy, how long has it taken me to do this? Like, how am I feeling when I'm doing this? And why is that? And that's an opportunity through that reflection to then decide, do you need, and what strategy do you create around that? And one of the strategies is, do I need other people in order to do that? Now, because you did your CliftonStrengths assessment, you knew that your execution, so there's 4 domains within the CliftonStrengths, and one is execution, the other one is strategic thinking, relationship building, and influencing. So they're the 4 key domain areas, and each theme, there's 34 talent themes, and each of those falls within a domain. Now for you, execution was quite low. Now that doesn't mean that you can't, but it doesn't mean that you can't execute. You're executing on something every single day. Okay. But it's about that particular task or activity that you're having to do that is not, it's not giving you any kind of energy. It's not keeping you excited at all about doing it, or let alone what it means for you. And so, that was a real moment for you, in that conversation that we had, that you recognize that, okay, I get it now, because my execution themes are lower down. Doesn't mean I can't execute. It just means I need to create some strategies around how I'm executing on some things, and on the things that I am executing on the tasks or the activities, whatever that looks like, and that does energize you. How do you do more of those?
I say this quite often to clients that are business owners, where they can look at a concept in their business, let's say a weekly newsletter, and that's quite a big concept. And they go, right, I'm going to schedule out Monday to do my newsletter. But doing a newsletter is so, it's so many different skills. It might be doing some research. Then there's the writing aspect of it. But then there's a tech aspect of it as well, where you're doing, and they think that they're like, why am I so tired from doing the newsletter? And it's like, well, it might actually be better to break it up into different times of different days if you're doing like all tech stuff and you're in that zone. And, I talk about batching for energy, but also looking at like, I don't need someone to do my whole newsletter. I can write it. I can research it. That bit, that all works perfectly for me. But do I want to be, uploading it? No, that's the bit for some reason that drains me, because that's just how I am.
So what you're describing there is the fact that you have conditions that need to exist in order for you to thrive, in order for you to feel energized. And that includes knowing which times of the day best serve us for any particular activity that we need to do. So for me, for example, I can't plan my days hour to the hour. I just can't do that. I need flexibility.
You're a manifesting generator.
I am, yes. My human design. So yes, I'm a man-gen, and I need that flexibility. I really do, which means there will be certain hours of the day I know I thrive best. I love working when everyone else is asleep. Now that, for people who are planners and for people who like an organized schedule, that may not necessarily be something that works for them. And so it was only really when I did my CliftonStrengths that some of these conditions started to come to the forefront for me, that they started to surface. And that's when I started to really lean into them and play around with it. I've been really playful with it all, and I still am. So these conditions, think of them as like baking a cake. When you bake a cake, there are certain conditions that need to exist. The temperature in the room needs to be of a certain temperature, the temperature of the oven. There's a certain level of ingredients that need to go into this particular cake. So there are various conditions that need to exist in order for this cake to come out looking beautiful, smelling great, tasting amazing. Okay. It's the same for us. We've got conditions that we need to exist in order for us to thrive. So it's important to understand what those conditions are that bring out the best in you. And also, let's be honest, we've got to be honest with ourselves about what doesn't light us up. What is it in our conditions that doesn't light us up, that is actually going to bring out the worst in us?
I love that you said playful and being playful with it, because this brings me back to our first discussion about it when we were in Mykonos last summer. And we got talking about human design, which you knew a bit about, but not too much, and CliftonStrengths and all of this. And we looked into your design and we sat for must have been about an hour and a half looking at your chart and just, diving into different bits. And you said, I can see so much how my strengths align with my human design. And, and we've got a lot of similar elements with the same profile, which the 1-3 profile, as a learner made so much sense. And for me with, ideation and intellection, all of that. And then we did the opposite. When you did my palm reading, I could see so much. I'm like, I can see how this fits in with my design as well, which I think is a nice way to approach it, because it's not this, this is one thing and you're in this system and then this is another thing. But when we can see the different crossovers and how they work with us and with our energy, I think that's a really empowering way.
Yeah, absolutely. It was really fascinating for me when we were going through the human design, and I could see all the my strengths and how the two reports actually do complement each other extremely well. Very, very fascinating. The interesting thing is, as you have big life events, there is a possibility that your strengths can change, and that is dependent on, life events taking place. Now, usually we don't recommend people taking the assessment twice within a short space of time. But certainly if there's a big gap and if there have been significant life events that have taken place in between that have then changed your way of being, then the chances are it can change. So it was just really fascinating to me that, taking the human design and looking at that and looking at my CliftonStrengths as they are right now, that's this stage in my life, is how well they do complement each other. And I do keep coming back to them both, actually. I come back to them both and I reflect on my environment. I reflect on my personal life, on my professional life, and just see how this is all panning out and how it's working and where I might need to make some changes. I'm human. I'm still developing, and, it's a lifelong journey, right? Developing. And as you said, my number one is actually learner, which means I love the process of learning. Absolutely love it. It's more the process of it. And for me, it's experiential. For me, experiential learning is the best way for me to learn, which means what? Which means I learn through life. I learn through life experiences. Some of them are painful, extremely painful. Some of them really great experiences that, that have helped me, who I am today, but also helped me go back to the drawing board and reflect on, right, what do I want to do now? What do I want to change? Or what do I keep? And how do I keep developing as a person? And so doesn't mean I'm dissatisfied with who I am. It just means I recognize that there's so much potential in human growth, and there's so much potential in humans. And, let's be playful with it. This is life. You've got to own it. And so I love being playful with it.
Look, as a fellow 1-3, and I have Maximizer as my second strength, I am fully with you, like you say. I think I did a podcast about this last year. No one has to do personal development. It's not required. It's completely optional. It's not like, if you don't do it, you're never going to be successful. There are plenty of successful people who don't go on that journey. They don't look inwards. They don't consciously look to develop, and that's okay. But are you going to have a better experience if you do? And are you going to accelerate your growth? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, well, success is very personal to every individual, right? It means something. Everyone's got their own perception of what success looks like to them and what it means to them. So absolutely, it's not for everybody, and not everyone's bought into it. And that's okay. Again, no judgment on, on what that is. They have designed their life in a way that suits them. And for others, personal development and professional development is a huge part of their life journey. So yeah, I mean, they both work. It's just down to the individual and what they thrive on and how they want to create their life.
And I think that's a great point you made about you're not dissatisfied, but you can be satisfied with who you are and where you are and what you've achieved and still want more. Sometimes we're on this hedonic treadmill where it's more, and we never stop to celebrate what we've achieved and where we've come. And it's just this constant pursuit of more without really taking stock and really celebrating and being like, yeah, like I did good. I'm proud of myself. And that's something that I work with clients on a lot. So they're not just like, okay, tick that box next. It's like, all right, you've just achieved something major. Can you sit in the good feelings? Because if you're able to do that and still go, and I still have aspirations to do more, I think that's a really balanced way of approaching it.
Yeah, I'm smiling as you're saying that, because my conditioning is very much from a place of you can always do more. You can always do more. And there are no boundaries. There are no limitations to what I can achieve. And interestingly, or not surprisingly, I've got achiever at number 2. And so I will keep pushing the boundaries, my own boundaries. I don't see any limitations to what I can do. There are limitations. Obviously, I'm not Superwoman, so there will be some things I can't do. And I accept those. But where I can push myself and where I can take my life, whether it's professional or personal, I don't see any limitations. I don't see any boundaries. I keep pushing. And I get a lot of enjoyment out of doing that. A lot.
I love that. And in our design with our mountains environment, both of us mountains active, and with our strengths, that's something that we have, we've talked about this, having that elevated conversation and being with people that challenge us, and you can have a really, get into the nitty gritty and reflect things back and learn different things. And, that's probably why you love the human design thing. And I love this, because that feeling of expanding and growing and taking on more knowledge, but collaboratively, and that really energizes both of us. I know whenever we've spent time together afterwards, we both feel like really great, even me as an introvert.
Yeah. So again, we're coming back to the conditions that we need in order to thrive, right? It's when we surround ourselves with the right people, when we have positive interactions with people that elevate us, it's something that we need to keep in our environment. And so those elevated conversations absolutely is key to my conditions, my environment, as it is yours. So yes, again, we come back to those conditions. And that's what I mean, is those conditions that need to exist in order for you to be at your best is very broad, like very broad. It's the people, it's your environment, it's the way you work, it's what you do in your spare time, it's the relationships that you've built. Like, it's very broad, very, very broad. And that's why it's really important for, your listeners to really reflect on that. So what are the conditions that I need in order to be my best? And when you're asking yourself that question, you've also got to ask yourself, what am I tolerating right now? What am I tolerating? Is this actually bringing out the best in me? Or is this something that I think is going to serve me well, but actually deep down inside, the reality is I know I need to let this go.
I'm going to wrap up there, because those are great reflections for anyone to take away. And I know we've only scratched the surface on this because it's a huge topic, but I really appreciate you coming and sharing that. And hopefully we've given a little bit of context to people. But if anyone is listening and wants to connect with Marjan, if they want a reading, which probably everyone will want a reading now after the way I've described it, all of your links will be in the show notes, so anyone can go and connect with you there. But before I let you go, obviously I'm going to ask you, what is one way that you can share with my audience that you own your energy so that you can perform at your best?
Am I only allowed one?
Yeah. Yeah, top one.
Top one. I'm going to stick with what I've already said. It's knowing the conditions I need in order to bring out the best in me, 100%. That does require self-awareness, obviously, is a big part of that. It does require honesty with myself as well as perhaps the perspective of others, because there's, you know, perceptions that other people will have of me as I interact with them. So it's important for me to understand that as well. But knowing the conditions that I need to bring out the best in me is absolutely key to owning my energy.
I love it. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for tuning into this week's episode. I hope that you're feeling expanded to what's possible for you, motivated to take action, and inspired about how you can start to own your energy. I share even more tools and resources on my Introverts Only email newsletter. By signing up, you not only get early access to the Ambitious Introvert products and services, but you also get brand new podcast episodes delivered straight to your inbox every Monday, meaning you'll never miss your weekly dose of introvert-friendly inspiration. Sign up now at theambitiousintrovert.com/newsletter or click the link in the show notes. See you next week.